Um, okay, thank you for that introduction. And as said, I'm still somewhat new here, so nice to meet you, everybody. As such, or as a consequence of that, I'll be talking about a research line that I started before coming here, before joining the faculty here, but it's still a good representation of the type of research that we're doing in our unit, because I'll be talking about sleep, which is covered by several people in our unit, like, for example, Marieke Lancel, or Julie Karsten, or Judith Daniels. And I'll be talking about anxiety disorders, and specifically about fear conditioning, which is also well covered by our unit by people like Peter de Jong or Mirjam Lomme, for example. So I want to start by naming some features of anxiety disorders. And to this end, I'll use the Sopranos family as an example. Now, suppose that one day you get robbed, you get attacked by that man over there. Let's name him Ralphie. As a consequence of that, you can imagine that you become afraid of him. And that would be an instance of classical conditioning. Why? Because there's a co-occurrence of the presence of this person with the event of getting robbed. And this causes a behavioral change in you. This causes fear responding of this person. Now, this in itself is not a unique feature of anxiety disorders. Why? Because everybody afterwards would be afraid of him, because it makes sense, he has proven to be dangerous. However, a first unique feature of anxiety disorders is very broad generalization. And what does this mean? Well, after getting robbed, you would not only be afraid of Ralphie, but you would become afraid of many men. For example, you would also be afraid when you come across Tony in a dark alley, or of Chris, and so on. Now, again, everybody shows some generalization, but people suffering from anxiety disorders show way more generalization. And then, as a specific instance of that, and again, a unique feature of anxiety disorders, is that in such patients, you would even see that they become, after such incident, afraid, fearful of stimuli, in this case people, with which they had positive experiences. Suppose, for example, that the man on top is named Bobby, and that he's your neighbor with which you had many positive interactions. Well, after getting robbed, people suffering from an anxiety disorder might even be somewhat afraid of him. Yeah? So there seems to be a safety deficit, like the safety is forgotten, and even he comes to elicit fear. So that's two features of anxiety disorders already, relatively broad generalization, this deficit in safety, and then there's a third one, maybe a bit in a different lane, and that's sleep disturbances. We know that people suffering from anxiety disorders are characterized by sleeping problems. And it has been proposed that this is not just a feature of anxiety disorders, but that this might also have some causal effects, that the sleep disturbances might cause other symptoms. And this has been confirmed in prospective studies, like sleep disturbances at baseline predict other anxiety symptoms at follow-up. Now, of course, such longitudinal studies in itself aren't enough, because it might, for example, be that there's a variable C of which early effects are the sleep disturbances and of which late effects are the other symptoms. So what you really need here is experimental research, and that's where our project comes in. There's 3 study designs that I quickly want to walk you through. And first, I need to say something about the fear conditioning procedure, because if you want to do experimental research about anxiety disorders, this is a very useful procedure. It allows you to model some aspect of anxiety disorders in the laboratory. I don't know whether some of you have already partook in a fear conditioning experiment, but it's fairly straightforward. Suppose you're a participant, you would be coming to our laboratory, and what you would see is a picture on the screen, for example, of the man on top. It would be there for a couple of seconds, and then afterwards you would get an electric shock at your wrist. This could be repeated a couple of times over trials, and then sometimes you would also get to see another picture, for example, of the man below. It would be there for a couple of seconds, and now this one wouldn't be followed by an electric shock. Yeah? So several trials of these events. And then there would be a test phase as well. And in this test phase, you would get to see different pictures. For example, the man on top. And this one is a bit like Ralphie, the man who attacked you. This is a picture that previously was followed by shock. So we expect to see some fear responding there. And we can measure this in different ways. For example, we can just ask people for threat estimates, like how likely do you think a shock, a bad thing, will happen now? We can also present the other pictures, for example, the man below, and we can test fear responding to that stimulus. And this one is a bit like Bobby, your friendly neighbor, with which you never had a negative experience. Yeah? And then we can also present new stimuli. These are like our generalization stimuli. In this case, it's there on your right, and the man in between. It's a morph of the other stimuli. It's a completely new stimulus, and we can see, okay, to which extent does this stimulus elicit fear. It's a bit like you've been attacked by Ralphie, you now meet a completely new man like Tony. Will this person elicit fear in you, yes or not? So we can have the whole spectrum there. But as said, we're not just interested in fear expression, we're interested in how sleep disturbances affect this fear expression. So we have to add some things to our procedure, and that's why we did the following. Everybody had the fear learning, what we call the acquisition phase, in the evening. Then they were tested to these different stimuli in the morning, and then crucially, of course, in between, during the night, people were either kept awake for the whole night or not. They could go home, sleep in their own bed. So this is like our model of sleep disturbances. Now, what did we find? And I'm showing the data here of the threat expectancy, so these estimates of how likely it is that a bad thing will happen. Well, we have a main effect of group here. So what you see is in the sleep deprivation group, in general, people report higher threat expectancies, consider it more likely that a bad thing will happen, that they will receive an electric shock. And if you then have a closer look at the graphs, you see that the difference is especially there for the black bar, which is, or which stands for this safe phase. It's the phase which was never followed by shock. And what you see now is that in the people who have been deprived of sleep, that even for that phase, they suddenly come to consider it quite likely that they will be receiving an electric shock. Yeah? So it seems that this sleep deprivation can cause these safety deficits. Now, if we go back and have a look at the design again on top there, this could be, or this difference could be caused by two different things, because the groups differ in different respects. First, they differ. The sleep deprivation group differs from the other group with respect to the fact that they're deprived of sleep after learning. So that could cause a difference between groups. However, the groups also differ with respect to whether they're deprived of sleep before testing. So that could also be the difference, the source of this difference. So there's two candidate explanations. And you could also map this on different explanations at the mental level. For example, it could be that the groups differ because the sleep deprivation group doesn't get a chance to sleep after learning, hence doesn't get a chance to really consolidate in memory what they have learned, because we know sleep enhances memory consolidation, and hence maybe it's the case that they start to confuse the phases. They can't really remember which one was followed by shock, which one was not, so they respond similarly to the two phases. So that's one option. Another explanation could be, well, maybe it has to do with the fact that they're sleep deprived during testing, so they're just in the state of higher heightened reactivity, and hence they show more fearful responding to these different stimuli. So it's two candidate explanations. So at that point, we had some nice findings, but also some clear follow-up questions. which allowed us to secure funding from FWO, which is a bit like NWO, and which also allowed us to hire a PhD student on your left, Anne-Katrien Zenses, who did her master here in Groningen, to do some of the follow-up experiments, for which we were really grateful, because as said, these sleep deprivation studies kind of have their toll. So it was really good to have somebody else to help with that. And then there on the right, you also see the other people involved in the project, Tom Beggers and Philippe Peigneux. So at that time, we did a first follow-up study, a second study. And if you remember the design of the first study, people got the fear learning in the evening, which kind of stands for getting robbed. They were tested in the morning, and then in between, they were either deprived of sleep or not. But as said, there's two possible explanations there, so we wanted to tear these explanations apart. So what did we do? We made a small change to the design, and basically everybody now got the opportunity to sleep after learning. So if there would still be a difference between the groups, it could only be due to a difference in sleep-deprived state during testing, because everybody got the chance to sleep after learning, everybody got the chance, if you want to go to the mental level, to consolidate in memory what they'd learned during the following night. Now, what did we find there? In one word, nothing. No longer any differences between the groups, so it was really like one step forward, one step back. Although that's maybe a bit too negative, because if you take the two studies together, it suggests, well, that the effect in the first study has to do with the sleep deprivation after learning. So that it's not so much the sleep-deprived state itself which makes the difference, which causes that people act fearfully in situations that they previously experienced as perfectly safe, but that it has to do with the sleep deprivation after learning. Now, of course, that asks for, again, a follow-up study. So that's where we're at now. And again, it's just a minor change from the very first design. As said, what's happened there was fear acquisition in the evening, testing in the morning, and then in between either deprived of sleep or not. What we did here is added just a second night of recovery sleep. So now, if we would find a difference between groups, it cannot be due to a difference in sleep-deprived state at testing, because everybody got a recovery sleep, everybody's well rested during testing. It can only be due to sleep deprivation after learning, getting the opportunity to consolidate in memory what you've learned, yes or no. But now, unfortunately, I have to leave you in suspense, because this is the study that is going on now. So we don't know yet. What we do know is that the procedure works, which was something that I worried about, in the sense that one night of recovery sleep is enough. So we tested this with several reaction time tasks and so on. So you can see that the night of recovery sleep helps people to again behave as if they're well rested, but we're still collecting the data in terms of the fear expression. So I hope to tell you more about this in a couple of weeks, months. We'll see. So thanks a lot.